Our organization has grown rapidly the last several years and in the process has outgrown our space. We initiated a capital campaign 2 years ago, and we're about halfway to our fundraising goal. But just the other day, we learned that one of our large funding sources is shifting their funding priorities, and our funding will be cut. Unless a miracle happens, we won't be able to quickly recoup this lost revenue. I am in panic mode, now considering potential staff layoffs and cutting some of our programs. Should we halt the capital campaign and refocus on getting donors to give to our general programs and operations? Or should we continue the capital campaign? And if so, how do I even begin to promote it when it's been so focused on growth and needing more space?
Ouch. I'm sorry. This is a terrible position to be in.
Yeah.
So number one, you're not alone. In 2000, after the pandemic, the federal government just opened the money bucket and started pouring money on organizations. And we've seen this everywhere, like tons of organizations that are getting they got lots and lots of money from 2020 on. And now we're finally seeing all of that money end. Those grant programs have all ended. All the money got dumped into states and municipalities is now ending. And there's a lot of organizations that saw massive growth because, look, it's new money, and they jumped at it, and then they've expanded, and now the money stopped. And because it was federal money, it wasn't something that was a long-term relationship that grew over time. It was something that just sort of popped up. Like, these organizations have now kind of run out of runway with being able to backfill with regular organization donations. Super common. You are not the only people in this boat. That said, I wish I had better news for you, because there's no easy way out of this. As you know, fundraising is a long, slow climb. It's not like a faucet that you can turn on. One of the most difficult things about nonprofits is that there's no easy way for us to raise money fast. Like, even if there's a massive problem, the money just comes on slow, and there might be a lot of it for a little while, and then it trickles out and it goes away. But there's never a way to just go, oh, here's an opportunity. How do we raise a bunch of money right now? Because there's just no way to do that unless you have a donor that you can convince to say this one donor is going to just like step in and fill that. And I think if you knew that was the case, you probably would have put that in the question, right?
Yeah.
So to going forward, I mean, I don't really have great news, because if you haven't salted some money away to be able to sort of smooth the bumps, you may not be able to finish your capital campaign. I don't know that I would recommend. I mean, it depends on your specific circumstances, like every question we get, right? There's stuff that we don't know, so we could be just giving you nonsense advice. But to me, it feels like if you don't have a reason to expand, then you don't have a reason to expand. And it's more about being embarrassed, going back to those donors who had committed to your capital campaign and saying, look, things have changed. We didn't foresee this. We thought we were going to be able to meet this goal. Other things came up, and it turns out that we aren't going to need to grow quite as fast because of the way things happened. And so we're not going to be able to build the building we told you that we wanted to build. So what would you like us to do? Shall we keep the money in the account, the capital campaign account, and invest it? And then when we're ready to do this again, we will use it. We will redeploy that money toward the capital campaign. Would you be interested in converting the money to operating funds so that we can continue to operate without cutting staff and lowering the amount of program delivery that we're doing? Or do you want the money back, right? So those are your options, because, I mean, you don't have to give the money back, but you probably want to make good long-term donor relationships and be truthful and honest with your donors. I think that's probably what barring better information, that's probably what I would recommend is start working on that conversation that really uncomfortable conversation that you're going to have with a bunch of donors.
Yeah, I agree with you, Andy. And I also, I want to think about this. So on a positive or optimistic note, I don't know enough. You talk about sort of one funding source had shifted priorities. So I guess what I want to understand, and I'm assuming you've already done this, but as they say, never assume, before you wrote into us, like, thinking about, are there other, you lost one, right? So you lost one heavy hitter donor, which is a big deal, right? That's a big deal. And it doesn't sound like it's just for 1 year. It sounds like permanently, right? They've shifted their priorities, at least for the time being. So you can't count on that money. But I guess I just am more curious to know, like, if you look at the whole picture financially and you look at all your donors and, if you think it's something that like you are going to rebuild, I don't know enough about sort of your donors, the amount, the number, what you've got in place to know, is it something that you think, you've got some other potential major gift prospects that perhaps you haven't actually gone after. If we're talking about like from an individual funding standpoint, and if that's the case, is there an opportunity to kind of fill that void and not be reactive right now, saying, oh my gosh, we're going to stop the campaign, but starting to look at like, how do we fill it? Are there ways we can fill it in other ways? And to Andy's point, right, it is a trickle effect. You don't just all of a sudden like usually just walk into it. But I don't know enough about your organization to know, could that potentially be the case for you? Maybe there's some that you've like not even had to scratch the surface because you had this really one large donor, because we see this happen, right? How many times nonprofits get the like sugar daddy donor and they're like sugar mama donor and they're like, yeah, like, right? And they go every year, but they have others that have been contributing along the way that potentially are like primed and ready to make a bigger gift, but actually maybe they haven't because of that really large donor. So I just want to try to think of maybe the glass is half full here for you, if that's the case. But again, not knowing all of it, and I'm happy, like I know we would probably be happy to take this. We could even have a conversation and you could remain anonymous if you wanted, like a conversation on the podcast about it, because it just feels like there's too many variables that I don't think it's easy to answer which direction to go without that. But I do think if you don't have that pipeline, right, like you've never done much fundraising, you don't have a lot of other sort of prospects hanging out there, then yeah, I think it's exactly what Andy said, is having that hard conversation with those who did say yes and saying, hey, we shifted and we want to, and, it's about making it about your stewardship. So really trying to make it about really good donor stewardship. And we want to make sure every dollar you've ever invested in us, we've delivered impact on, and we don't want that to change now. And the circumstances have changed. So we want to be honest. And so can we come forward? And so finding a way to make it less about, I mean, I know it's still going to be embarrassing, but less about, oh, shoot, like we screwed up, and more about like, we're actually really trying to care for your investment. So I don't know. Though maybe is that a glimmer of hope, at least, Andy, you think? A little?
That was certainly more than mine. Mine did not have a glimmer.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Well, it's Andy and Stacey again, which means it must be every other Wednesday. That's how you know. Oh, it's Wednesday. The podcast is on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is nice. So thanks for joining us. We're here to answer nonprofit questions. The way it works is that you send those to questions@nonprofiteverything.com, or send them to us through the social channels or Discord, or go to the Nonprofit Everything website and click the button, which I recently looked at. It's yellow. I thought it was red. It's not a red button. Ooh. It's a yellow button, which fits in with, I think, the color scheme that we set. So click the yellow button to ask us a question, and we will do our best to answer it. Or if we can't, we will bring in a guest expert and have the guest expert talk about it. We always laugh about the intros being kind of like, this is the only place where we really get to have conversations about anything that isn't a nonprofit question, unless we go off topic, which we do a lot.
We do. We get on our soapbox, and let's be honest, I will at least speak for myself. I feel like nonprofit stuff is a huge majority of my life. So I'm not, maybe that's why the intros are hard. I don't have much of a life outside of what I do.
This is it. This is, I think, Stacey and I we start to exist at the beginning of the podcast, and then we cease to exist at the end of the podcast. That's the only, we're imaginary This is it. This is it. So maybe we just need to work on having lives outside of the nonprofit sector. Is that possible?
I don't know.
Maybe not.
I don't know. That sounds hard. That sounds like a lot
hard.
of work. I'm feeling a little tired today. So you're asking me the wrong question, wrong time.
Maybe we should just answer some questions then.
Okay. Random questions. Like we could get those conversation cards, those conversation card decks that drive my husband nuts because I love to pull out those random cards. Yeah. That's what we could do.
There you go. We'll do that for next time.
Okay. A year or so ago, another nonprofit asked us to merge with them. We declined the opportunity, but are now finding that they are replicating the same programs and services we provide. They are also starting to capture large parts of the market we traditionally serve. Given the competition between us, I am wondering how best to stand out from the other organization. Do you have any recommendations for specific strategies we can use to position ourselves amidst our competitors?
Oh, I love this question. This is one of my favorite nonprofit topics. Thank you for sending this in. This is like candy. It's like
he's literally
Christmas
salivating.
morning.
If you could see him right now, he's
Christmas
salivating.
Morning nonprofit competition. Somebody's PhD thesis is like, it's like glowing right now. So I don't think this is my controversial opinion for the podcast today. I don't think there's such a thing as nonprofit competition. I don't think that exists. I think, and this is sort of the corollary to when donors say things like, there are too many people serving this need in this community. Why don't you guys just get together and do it together? Why are there 4 people working on this problem? Because the answer is always, is the problem solved? And the answer is almost always no. Right? The answer is the community has not solved the problem. So why would we not want the largest number of people trying to solve it? So then you take it a step further and say, is it more effective to have a single way to solve it? Or are there multiple ways to try to solve that particular problem? Like, if you take something like homelessness, is there just one solution to homelessness? No, because if there were, we would only need one organization. But there's like multiple challenges. As we know, nothing's a problem on its own. Everything's a problem stacked on top of another problem, stacked on top of another problem. This is why nonprofits exist, is to tackle these kinds of really complicated things. And so the fact that there's more than one person in the market, in the nonprofit market, such as it is, trying to solve the same challenge, I think that's fantastic. And I think looking at it in terms of competition, what you're probably doing is turning the lens around and saying, they're going after our donors. They've copied our problems. They're going after our donors. They might have, maybe they're better at TikTok than we are, and they happen to be getting more news stories or something. There's some other thing that they're doing better than we're doing, and it's making us angry because we were here first, and this is my territory, right? So that's the feeling you're having. But I would take a step back and say, have we solved the problem? Is it good to have more than one person in the market? Yeah. So how are you going to differentiate yourself? Is the solution that you've come up with the only way to solve the challenge? Are the programs that you're doing the only programs that are available? Have you tapped out your whole market? Have you created all of the? Have you like solved the problem for all the people that have the problem in the community? I'm sort of defaulting as if it's something that's like that can be solved. If it's a performing arts center, it's a totally different answer, but I'm assuming it's some sort of social service thing, right?
Right.
So as long as we're doing that, I don't think you have a problem. I think you've got an opportunity. And if you really truly are doing the exact same thing in the exact same way, open up the merger conversation again, because then it's just egos and boards and staff, and that doesn't help solve the problem either. What do you think, Stacey?
I think that it's interesting because I can resonate. At first, I did a little bit of a cringe when you were like, no, I don't think there's competition. But I agree with exactly the way you shared it. I also think there is a sense of feeling, it's definitely coming from a sense of feeling threatened. And it is resource and attention threats, right? Like that lead to these things and that lead to boards that, again, when you have competition may look a little different in the for-profit world than it does when we're talking about large. It does look different, right? So this becomes a much more relevant. So you've got board members that may be panicking or freaking out about this kind of thing. And it's sometimes you have to rein them in with those exact questions Andy just said, right? Like, is the problem solved yet? And maybe it's okay that there's 5 of us. Now, where I do think from a fundraising perspective, you don't want it to be confusing to donors, right? We've seen those organizations where everyone gets them mixed up because if they're doing, their names are similar or they're doing similar things. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. So what exactly? So I do think you can have a larger conversation of what is it that we do, like, back to like typical SWOT analysis. What is it, our strength that we do really well, like better than anyone? And that means really knowing. So that's the problem, right? People go into this and they do that and they don't actually know much about their marketplace. And so kind of like what Andy and I talk about when someone's starting a nonprofit, we're always like, hey, do your research, figure out what's going on out there, figure out what others are doing. I mean, now is a good time if you're feeling this sense of, or you're being pushed by whatever your board or external influencers about this, like think about like, what is it? What's going on here? Like, what is it that others are doing? How are they doing it? What is it that we're doing? How are we different? What are we known for, right? Like, what are we most known for? What is it that we are the go-to? And sometimes you don't always know that. It's actually a really compelling question to talk to those you serve to say, why us? Like, there's a lot of options. Is it because we were the only one that was, got recommended to you? And if so, then guess what? That's valuable information. So I feel like you have an opportunity to do some of that research to really and then like, how do you keep building on that? Because we all know that's, at least in traditional for-profit, corporate or competitive environments, like it's like, let's build on what is it we are rock stars at? How do we keep, and then maybe there is some collaboration, believe it or not, with the competitor, like, okay, we're not as good at this, but they do this. So like maybe their marketing rocks, maybe our fundraising rocks. How do we like combine forces for the topic as a whole that'll benefit both of us? So it just feels like there's, yes, opportunity comes to mind here instead of threat, instead of like scarcity mindset. This question gets me excited for you, right? Like, I think I'm kind of geeking out about this, like Andy was at the beginning, like saying it's candy, because it really is, like, yeah. Right?
It totally is. It's like one of the things that you need to look at in terms of competition for nonprofits, right, is that you're not competing with other nonprofits ever. Like you can think you are, but you never are. What you're actually competing with is them not giving to anybody or them giving to anything else at all. So you're not competing with just like the people that are doing the thing you're doing. You're competing with their Netflix subscription. You're competing with the Starbucks venti latte they just got, right? All of those things are what takes away from the amount of money that somebody's going to give to charity. You're competing with whatever the administration decides to like get rid of whatever tax credit so that they've got a little bit more money at the end of the year. And they're like, oh no, we need to maximize that thing. So put a couple more dollars there. Where's it going to go? Right. So you're, to be honest, like the decision is never going to be you versus them. The decision, unless it's like a federal grant, right, where it's a very specific basket of things and it's got this really narrow focus and there's 2 exact organizations, then it's 100% a competition and the government's going to go with whoever does the application better or whoever's been around in the market longer, which means you might have an advantage there. But for anybody else, it's about like who got the direct mail piece in the person's hand when they were thinking about writing a check. Or who do they know who's on your board, who's not on their board? Like all those other things come into play for that decision. And it's not like you're trying to decide what car to buy and you like go test drive a bunch of cars. Like nobody donates like that. It's impossible.
Well, and what gets me excited on a more macro picture is when you look at some of the models just across the US that are starting to look at things it's less about the organization, right? It's not about the organization. The organization is purely a conduit. And it's really, instead of the organization at the center of the hub of everything is about our organization, it's really about, the client is at the center of our hub. And so it's about that. And so thinking about, that's been tried for a while, but it just seems like it's picking up energy again of looking at things going, how are we all moving the dial on the client? And so what is our unique spot that we can like rocket in to move the dial for the client. It goes back to, we had that theory of change question a while ago, right, Andy, or a little while ago, right? Like this reminds me of that, thinking about what part of that equation, you're not going to do it all. This is a huge issue. So like what piece can you be so good at, which also then begs, and Carly, a lot of people would disagree with this, and I'm getting off topic, but I got to just say it. Like, right? How many times are nonprofits like, just let's keep adding programs instead of ever really knocking it out of the park with one? I don't know. I'm just one that I'm like, gosh, be known for that one or two thing, like that thing, be really known for it because you do it so amazingly. Like, how cool? Like that'll keep you, funded for years. And so, but everyone's like, oh, and funders. Sometimes funders are like that too, right?
Yes.
Oh, what's your new program idea? It's like, stop. Anyway, I'm diverging into a whole other ball of wax, right?
I love this. It's like, look forward to Stacey and Andy's forthcoming book called Nonprofit Competition.
Yes.
We're not really doing that. I serve on our organization's executive committee, and we are in the midst of wrapping up our first performance review process for our ED, who is our only paid staff. The board gave him pretty high ratings, but a couple of volunteers rated the ED pretty low, which is impacting his ratings when averaged. I'm concerned the ED will be discouraged when he gets the ratings, particularly without having the context of who scored him poorly. I don't want him to think the board isn't happy with his performance. What advice do you have for handling this delicate situation and not demoralizing the ED in the process?
I always think with things like this, context is helpful. And I don't know how many volunteers were asked to review the ED. So this is where I'm going with my thought process. If there was a large pool of volunteers, large being more than it's easily identifiable, that there's a couple that are unhappy. Like I feel like if you have a large pool of volunteers, it would be okay to actually share, here's your composite like review rating or however, I don't know what your system is, right? Here's how the board rated, here's how volunteers, and if you had other segments, like I think that's okay to share that, because if there's a weaker spot or a pain point, or you and I both know, like the challenge with the review process is you tick off someone, whether it's a staff member, whether it's a volunteer, or you tell them no, and then they have to do a review on you. You so many times, right? Like it gets reflected in the review. And so then the challenge becomes like, it's not actually a fair assessment of you overall. It was a moment in time. And so to my mind, like, I guess I think providing transparency and not obviously telling names for who said what, but like being able to say, you did really well. Like your ratings, like the board is really excited and feels really strongly about your capabilities and XYZ and how you've done this for the organization. And so like, way to rock on. Now, on the flip side, and listen, it's only a couple of outliers. So like, we are not as a board concerned about this. Like that's important too, right? Because I think as an ED, you're like, oh gosh, is my head on the chopping block because I got a couple of people who said really crappy stuff or gave me really crappy ratings or whatever. Like, I think you've got to, if the board has decided that's a non-issue or that it's not an issue, like it's not enough to warrant any challenge, then being able to share that so the ED doesn't hold on to that. But I also think it might be interesting, depending on what that pool is and how much of a, if this is like you interviewed 3 volunteers and 2 out of the 3 had really negative things, I don't know, like maybe it's interesting to have a conversation with the ED about, is that something we need to look at? Or is that something you feel like, is there something you can think of that may have resulted in that? I mean, just from a standpoint of that ED's sort of own kind of professional development, that's where my brain is going with this. I don't know if that's even accurate, like the best way. And I also don't know, what I'm trying to do is not jeopardize the volunteers that did provide feedback. If it is a tiny pool, then it becomes pretty easy process of elimination. And you hope that the ED will be professional enough to not take it out on the volunteers as a whole. And I mean, I'm going to hope that that's not the case, but that's the reality of this stuff, right? And so you kind of go, that's where I feel like it gets dicey. I don't know, Andy, are you thinking of this in a different way than I am?
Maybe a little. I think I would, there's like an unstated assumption that probably needs to be addressed, which is you've decided to do a survey that includes a ranking of or a rating for the executive director. I'm assuming there's more to it than that, but who says that you need to share the raw results with the executive director? You're the board. You can do whatever you want. This is actually your only job, is to oversee the executive director. So if you don't think that that fairly reflects the performance of the ED, or you think that, you know, these two volunteers had an axe to grind because they replaced the agapanthus in the landscaping and that was just the last straw for Edna, right? Whatever that was, like maybe it's not something that's really important. So, but then that sort of leads me to the question back to you, Stacey, which is like, what does a good ED performance review process look like? Is it a survey of volunteers? Is that a piece of it? Or like, I mean, I know a lot of boards like don't really dig very deeply when they review the executive director too. Like organizations that I've been with, it's like, really? That's all you did is you just like voted and gave her more salary? That seems not very rigorous, right?
Yeah. I mean, what I love is when it's actually a thought out written process. This is what we do. This is sort of the process we use. It needs to be a full board process. So many times you see it like delegated to an exec committee or governance committee, and they can do the heavy lift on like collecting, administering it and collecting results. But it really is full board needs to have feedback in the process and also officially like approve whatever it is that's going to be presented to the ED. And again, if there's any comp adjustments at that, taking that into consideration, maybe that's separate, maybe that's combined. And then I feel like the process, it's less about, I mean, you could do the ones I've seen that I like are some combo of, you might have, it's again, like less about, like, it's more about organizational, like, it's more about how's the organization performing because the ED is leading that organization. Maybe there's a handful of sort of individual like leadership qualities and skills, but it's less about, did you come to work like on time? Right. And it's less, right. Like, do not do that in your ED evaluation.
How drunk were you at the gala?
Yes. How many? Yeah. How many drinks did you have? So I feel like it's a little bit of a bigger picture, holistic. I think that's what gets boards caught up because they're like, this isn't like a traditional employee review where like we are seeing and measuring these things on day to day. And so I think what happens is, so obviously the board all has to, that is their sole, that's one of their key responsibilities. But I also think in this case, did the board feel like they wanted to get outside of themselves? I'm guessing wanted other feedback on key constituencies, which as we know, like it can be helpful, but I think needs to be still taken into the larger context because of the reasons we're talking about. So sometimes you see it with direct reports have a chance to share feedback. And sometimes it's less about ratings and more about like, what's one thing that you think you like this person's doing really well from your, in your role, and what is one thing you wish or that you could see the person improving that would help strengthen the organization. Like, I think I like questions more like that because that gives me more to go off of, right? Just a number. We all know like numbers can I don't know, they don't paint enough of a picture. Like, what do you do, right? You're an ED and you get your results and you're like, wow, I have an average rating of a 3 out of a 1 to 5. Like I'm at like, this is an average rating. Like wouldn't you want to know, right? Wouldn't you want to know a little more? I don't know. To me, like if you're going to make this valuable, there needs to be some like besides, in addition to just that rating, like there's some, so, like someone gets to actually give you some specific examples or like, hey, this is where we see this. Like it's not just quantitative, right? Like there's a qualitative piece to it is the way I look at it. And I think is really probably more, in line with any kind of review process beyond just ED evals, right? Like that's helpful to people.
Yeah. I know it's just me when I'm asked to do ratings or things like that. It's like, I'm just so lazy. Like, I don't want to give you more information. I thought it was a 4, right? That's all I'm going to tell you.
And that's why I don't think you make it a requirement, right?
Yeah,
you kind of do right? Like you have it as like optional, like if you want to elaborate. And I tend to, like, when I've done these or helped boards with these before, like I'll put something like, if you scored it like less than this, please elaborate, because that's like where, right? Because then you're like, all right, don't worry about it. If you gave them like average and above, that's fine. But if we're talking about like, you really think it's poor performance, why? Like, what's going on? Thanks so much for hanging out with Andy and me today. It was great to be able to hang out with my bud. He and I always enjoy just catching up and having these kinds of conversations, and they wouldn't be possible without you. So we always have endless gratitude for all of you for helping keep this around. How long have we been doing this, Andy? 5 years, is it?
It's been like 5 years, 155 episodes, I think, at this point.
Wow. Oh my gosh. It's hard to, we've been through a pandemic together and with all of you and all sorts of things. So it's interesting to see where life takes us in 5 years. So anyways, who knows where we'll be? My goal is that in 5 years, the Nonprofit Everything podcast will be like on the top 3 most, like listened to podcasts. So Andy knows I'm a little bit competitive with this stuff, and I really want to just always increase listenership. So, you can help make that goal possible. Because wouldn't you love to be able to say, yep, I'm a listener of Nonprofit Everything, and it's like the cool thing in the sector. So there is the goal. And we can make that possible by you listening, by you asking us questions, and by, you sharing reviews. And, saying, hopefully giving us 2 thumbs up, or, telling us what you like, and maybe not publicly tell us what you don't like, maybe just privately reach out to us. But anyways, with that said, thank you for tuning into this episode. And as always, you can find us on social channels, Discord, or nonprofiteverything.com.